Welcome to the Unitarian Society of New Haven. I am Rich Stockton, a member of the Worship Committee and your worship associate today. You can refer to me with the pronouns he and him. And happy Mother's Day. Today we continue exploring the monthly theme of story. If you're joining us for the first time, we're so glad you chose to spend this time with us. We meet electronically for now, but we look forward to being together again in person. This is a congregation that believes Black Lives Matter, that every person has the right to affirm their own gender identity, and that all people are inherently worthy. We come into this community loving our quirks and questions as much as our noblest ideals that call us to meaningful lives. We bring all that we are to this place, knowing that our whole selves are welcome here. You can go to our website, usnh.org, to find out more about us, and if you click on Online Services, that will tell you how to join a Zoom meeting after the service to be part of a weekly Welcome Corner visitor chat. You can also contact us by email at membership@usnh.org. You can view announcements at the end of the service and in our newsletter. For now, I want to specifically mention the following. On Saturday, May 15th, the Social Justice Drive-Thru will run from 9:30 to 11:30. And among the usual collections, will feature a donation drive to fill backpacks for the clients Columbus House serves. The 5th through 12th graders are running this collection, and a list of items that can be donated is in your newsletter. Also on May 15th, we'll have our annual chocolate auction outside. Items can be dropped off between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m., with the auction starting at 10:30. And following the chocolate auction, all are invited to stay as new USNH members sign the membership book in a brief ritual. Finally, on Saturday, May 29th at 3 p.m., Reverend Linda Susan and Jesse will be offering a blessing of the animals in the USNH parking lot. All are welcome to bring pets, pictures of pets, and even memories of special animals to receive this blessing. Maddie Stover will also be collecting pet supplies for the New Haven Animal Shelter.
For all the mothers and mother figures, the grandmothers, aunts, and extended family members who mother, the soon-to-be mothers, the wish they were mothers, the never wanted to be mothers, the it's complicated mothers, the birth mothers, foster mothers, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, the used-to-be dad mothers, and more than one mom mothers, the single mothers, separated mothers, stay-at-home mothers, and unhoused mothers, the grieving mothers, those who grieve their mothers, and those whose grief is complex. For all the communities that mother, and for all who depend on the Great Mother, you are held and beloved.
Covenant lies at the center of how Unitarian Universalists gather in community. We are united not by a particular set of beliefs, but by the promises we make about how we will be together, how we will treat each other, and how we will seek to mend relationships when we fall short of our aspirations. While the following words express our intentions in writing, our true covenant lives and breathes in our actions. Please join me now in reciting the words that appear on your screen. We covenant together to create and nurture a culture of respect and kindness, and to engage in the spiritual and everyday practices of loving more generously. To this end, we will strive to be open, value differences, Listen deeply. Use kind language. Speak our truths. Work with conflict. And seek humor and joy. Our chalice lighting today is from Claudine Oliva. We light this chalice for mothers and mothering, to celebrate those who have taken on the task of nurturing a young one, baby, child, or youth, into adulthood, to celebrate those who have nourished the light of truth and compassion in growing minds and hearts, to celebrate those who have committed time, money, energy to the growth of others in this world. We light this chalice to celebrate and hold dear this flame of love.
Ancient story lived again, dark of longest night, birth of innocence and hope kindles our delight. All celebrate the labor's end, for the laughter, tear, and smile, light of love and joy extend all around her child. May our wonder never cease, nature's greatest art, birth and breath of life again, warms the coldest heart. Now rich and simple gifts bestowed, sacred promises well made, reverence and hope renewed, all around the maid. Vision for humanity, all around her child, loving as one family, all around her child. Life passages well understood, known and felt around the earth, rich or poor we each are blessed by the miracle of birth.
Good morning. We continue the month of May with the theme of story shaping our worship. One of the stories that I find to be the most profound and thought-provoking from the Hebrew scriptures is the story of the Exodus, in which Moses leads his people away from slavery and towards liberation. Now, to me, in many ways, this is kind of a superhero story, and Moses is an early version of a superhero. And just like most superhero stories, there is a backstory. And today we're going to explore the backstory of Moses. I love the backstory because it is simply a story of how far a mother, a parent, will go to ensure the safety of her child. So this morning we're going to explore the story of Moses in the Moses basket.
The Moses Basket by Jenny Korolek. Illustrations by Pauline Baines. Long, long ago in the land of Egypt, there were thousands and thousands of Hebrew slaves. Once they had been shepherds who roamed far and wide beyond the great river Nile with their flocks. But the powerful Pharaoh began to force them to build his temples, tombs, pyramids, and palaces, with bricks made from straw and mud, and to drag huge stones across the desert for pillars and walls. They worked hard. If they stopped to rest, cruel overseers would whip them back to work. And now the Pharaoh had so many Hebrew slaves, he began to fear that they might turn against him. So he sent out a terrible command. Every baby boy born to a Hebrew slave was to be thrown into the river. But there was one mother who was determined not to let her little son die. "I will hide him on the river," she said. "That's the last place Pharaoh's soldiers will go looking for babies. I will weave him a cradle out of papyrus reeds, and I will cover it with slime and pitch so that it will float like a boat." The baby's sister, Miriam, ran down to the river as the sun was setting, and cutting a huge bundle of reeds, staggered home with them as fast as she could. Her mother set to work at once. All night she wove the reeds with nimble fingers, shaping them firmly and tightly into a small cradle. Then she carefully covered every inch of it with slime and pitch. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she held her sleeping son close for one last time. Then she laid him in the cradle and tenderly covered him up. The sun was slowly rising, the great burning African sun, as Miriam helped her mother carry the little basket down to the river. Their feet made no sound on the damp, sandy ground. "Hurry, mother, hurry," said Miriam. "She will be here soon." "Who will be here soon?" said her mother. "The princess, Pharaoh's daughter. I've often seen her bathing here early in the morning." "If the princess finds our baby, she will kill him," whispered Miriam's mother. "No," said Miriam, "she will save him." "How do you know?" said her mother. "Because I know things," said Miriam, gently stroking the baby's head. "Remember how the house was filled with sunbeams and moonbeams when he was born? I knew then that he was special. But quick, help me set the basket afloat." Together, mother and daughter waded into the shallow waters and gave the basket a gentle push. At once, the basket began to float, like the beautifully made small boat it was. Creeping through the reeds, they followed the basket with the sleeping baby in it. Above them, the sun slowly turned the river to gold. And then everything happened at once. A crowd of young girls, laughing and chattering, came out of the palace and began running gaily through the garden down the steps. "What did I tell you?" whispered Miriam. "Here comes the princess." "She's the tallest one." "She's seen the basket," said her mother softly. "Look, she's sending a servant to fetch it." They hardly dared to look as the baby was laid in the princess's arms. He was crying. "Isn't he beautiful?" the princess said. "He must be one of the Hebrew babies. Oh, poor little thing, he's hungry. He still needs his mother's milk." Then Miriam stepped bravely out of the reeds and went straight up to the princess. She fell to her knees and said, "Your Highness, shall I call one of the slave women to come and nurse the baby for you?" The princess smiled at Miriam. She seemed to understand. "Yes, child, go," she said. Miriam ran back and fetched her mother, who came and knelt before the princess. "I will pay you to feed the child until he is old enough to come back to me," said the princess, placing the baby in his mother's arms. "Then I shall raise him as my own son. He will be a prince, and I shall call him Moses, because it means drawn from the water." When they were safely home again, Miriam's mother stared at her with tears of joy in her eyes. "It all happened as you said it would," she said. "Yes," said Miriam. And she picked up her drum and began to sing and dance, just as she would do many years later, when Moses led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt into freedom in a land of milk and honey.
In this spiritual community, we remind ourselves each week that joy and woe are woven fine. Some of us bear burdens made lighter as others help us carry it. Some of us hold joys that shine more brightly as others reflect our delight. Unfortunately, this week we received heartbreaking news from Patrick Korth. After a 7-year battle with cancer, Lindsay Korth moved on to her next adventure Sunday, May 2nd. She was able to be joined by her family to celebrate her life with many laughs and tears and to say goodbye. Together, let us give thanks for this community of care.
I invite you into a spirit of meditation, prayer, or contemplation of ultimate things. Spirit of life, we remember the people of India who are particularly struggling with the pandemic right now. May they find comfort while grieving their losses. May they find relief from new infections and deaths. Spirit of mercy, we remember those killed by gun violence, whose names are too numerous to recite. May our country learn to value life above property and mutuality over politics. Spirit of hope, we remember that we have the ability to begin again, even in difficult times. May we tap into something larger than ourselves and be renewed for the long haul. Together, let us enter a time of silence. Amen, and blessed be.
When darkness drops an anchor in the fearful oceans of
Hi, I'm Edie.
I'm Gretchen,
And I'm John.
and we have always loved being a part of USNH, and we love supporting this place for so many reasons. It really does feel like family to us. We loved it when we got to make apple crumble with the kids' service team to help prepare for Abraham's tent and giving people without homes a place to stay. And
I like spending time with my friends in the RE class, and I like the snacks in the social hall.
yeah, we do like those snacks in the social hall and the team that helps prepare them and keeping us together during times when we can't be together as well. Even this video is put up by someone who is able to do it because of the means that USNH has from its congregation.
We are grateful to have religious education not only for kids but for adults. Small group ministries are a place where we have loved getting to know our fellow congregants, meditate with them, and discuss powerful books with Reverend Linda Susan, even at a distance.
Knowing that our donation helps programs like Waverly, the Immigrant and Refugee Task Force, and so many more social justice programs is another reason we give to USNH. We long for the day when all people know they are loved.
The music at USNH is meaningful and uplifting, with Jeff and Erica leading our wonderful choir and Bill's beautiful piano playing. We loved it from the moment we set foot at USNH.
Thank you so much for your stewardship pledges, joining us in supporting this wonderful place.
Thank you.
Religious education, social justice, music, inspiration, community, love. Whatever your reasons for being part of USNH, please include generosity on the list. Many of you already have by making your pledge for the coming year. Thank you. And for those who haven't turned in your pledge form yet, we're in the last week before the budget for 2021-22 gets finalized. So I urge you to get in touch with our hardworking stewardship team and wrap that up. Of course, generosity isn't just about looking ahead, but also about gratitude in the here and now. If you're able, please go to usnh.org and click on the donations link at the top right of the page. Make a gift today, online, or by sending a check to USNH, 700 Hartford Turnpike, Hamden, Connecticut, 06517. Thank you so much.
Today's reading is Separation by W.S. Merwin. Your absence has gone through me like thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its color. And so ends the reading.
Many years ago, there was a massive flood when a big river took over an entire region, including several cities. The river was wide and broke off into many smaller rivers on its way out to the sea, and even many of these flooded, along with the towns that grew up along the banks. It wasn't until you got all the way down to the small streams and the tiny villages that people were safe. One of the people in one of those villages was an old seamstress named Talia. Not long after the flood had started to subside, she was heading to the stream to get water when she noticed a half barrel sitting up on some reeds, hidden by the branches of a willow tree. Now, normally, Talia wouldn't have given such a thing much notice, but she thought it was rather strange that the barrel had been cut in half lengthwise, because you can't really store anything like that. As she drew closer, she also noticed something else strange. Even with mud on the outside, she could tell the wood had been sanded and polished at some point. But the strangest part was when she came right up to it and saw a baby sleeping inside. She realized someone must have fashioned a crib out of a barrel, because carved in the wood above the baby's head, it said, Hazel. Talia thought, Oh, poor thing. She must have cried herself to sleep. I'll take her home and get her something to eat while I ask around. Her parents must be worried sick. So Talia gathered the cradle and her water pail and made her way home. As she asked around, though, no one in the village knew whose child it was. The next day she asked if anyone had relatives missing a child, but no one did. The day after that, she placed a few discreet inquiries about whether someone might have offended the fairies who steal children, but nothing. She even asked her neighbors traveling upstream to check whether anyone in the next village had heard about a little girl named Hazel, but still no one claimed her. So day after day, the old woman kept feeding her and singing to her and making her beautiful clothes and teaching her peekaboo and raising her like a beloved daughter. What Talia didn't know was that much further upstream, on a farm just outside one of the towns that had been hit hard by the flood, there was a family missing a little girl named Hazel. She was their 7th and youngest child, and they searched frantically for her. When the father and oldest boy went to market to sell their vegetables, they'd ask everyone if they'd heard of a baby named Hazel. The oldest girl would ride as far as she could in a day, asking everyone along the way if they'd heard of her sister. When their friends went to a cousin's wedding far away, they begged them to bring back any news, but to no avail. Then one day, a troubadour who'd been wandering throughout the region came to market to buy some food. When he came to the stall with Hazel's father and brother, they asked him, without much hope, because almost a year had passed by then, if he knew of a girl named Hazel. The troubadour was surprised. "That's strange you should ask. I was in a village far downstream about a week ago, and there was a little girl named Hazel. She lives with a renowned seamstress there named Talia. But I'm not sure this is your little girl. The woman clearly loves her as any mother would. I wouldn't get your hopes up." Well, it was too late for that. This was the first news they'd had, and they knew they had to find out. So they thanked the troubadour, closed up the stall, and raced home. Shortly afterwards, the parents packed up provisions, put the oldest boy and girl in charge of the younger children, and headed out on the road downstream. Hazel, of course, had grown considerably in the year she'd stayed with Talia. She could run around by herself and loved to chase the neighbors' chickens. She'd also started talking, asking, "Piggyback?" for rides in a beautiful cloth carrier that Talia had fashioned. Every night, Talia would read to Hazel and tuck her in with a kiss on each cheek, telling her, "I love you beyond words and beyond time. Sweet dreams, my girl." Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a year and a day after the flood, as Talia was working on her sewing and Hazel was playing on the floor, Talia looked out the window and saw a man and a woman jump off their horses and tie them to the front fence. All at once, she knew who these eager strangers must be. Hazel's parents, coming to take her back. Talia had always feared this day, like an axe hanging by a thread just out of sight. As the months had passed, though, her uneasiness had moved into the background, just like the floodwaters subsiding. Now that it was real, only the banks of her eyelids overflowed. Talia took Hazel's hand, and they walked outside together to meet the girl's parents. As soon as the mother and father caught sight of Hazel, they knew they'd found their little girl. "Please, come inside," said Talia. "I know why you're here, but you must be tired and thirsty. Let's share some tea before you go." So they all went back into the house, and as Talia fixed the tea, she told them the story of how she'd found Hazel and how she'd tried to find the girl's family, and how eventually she had come to love her as her daughter. And the parents told their story of the terrifying flood, and how they'd lost animals and crops, and how they panicked when they realized that Hazel and her barrel crib had floated away without a word, and how they'd never stopped looking. The father said to Talia, "We have very little, but please let us pay you something for your trouble. You've obviously taken great care of our girl, and growing children eat so much." Talia was furious. "I don't want your money. Do you think a mother's love can be bought and sold? You'll be taking my heart with you when you leave. Don't insult me by trying to measure its value with a few coins." "Please, I meant no disrespect. We're just so relieved Hazel is safe and coming home with us. What kindness can we show you for the kindness you've shown her?" Talia thought for a moment. "All right then. All I ask is that you hold on to the quilt that I made for her. I've stitched many garments in my life, but I put more of myself into this piece than anything else I've ever made. Even if Hazel is too young to remember me, she'll know just by looking at the quilt that she was deeply loved." The parents readily agreed. So Talia gathered Hazel's few things, some clothes, some books, her favorite stuffed animal, and wrapped them up in the quilt. Then she folded Hazel into a gigantic hug and kissed her on each cheek and whispered into her ear, "I'll always love you, beyond words and beyond time. Goodbye, my girl." Then the parents climbed onto their horses with Hazel and the packet and rode back to their farm with their miraculous good news. Of course, it wasn't good news for Talia. Her grief was so overwhelming, she could barely move. Her chest felt like there was a hazel-shaped hole in it. She sometimes thought she could put her hand right there and someone behind her would think she was waving. Eventually, she was able to get back into her routine, back and forth to the general store to buy thread, back and forth to her neighbor's house to trade vegetables from their gardens, back and forth to the river for water. This was the pattern of her life. She sent Hazel love every day, everywhere she went. In everything she sewed, she filled it with love for her little girl. People came from all over to buy her creations because they shone with the bittersweet mixture of her affection and her grief. And each night, she'd blow 2 kisses into the air, saying, "I love you beyond words and beyond time. Sleep well, my girl." Meanwhile, life on the farm began to return to normal for Hazel's family. Everyone rejoiced at her return, of course, but at some point there were crops to tend and animals to feed and meals to cook and bills to pay, and with 7 children, even the most doting parents get distracted by all the hard work it takes to support them. As the years went on, Hazel was left to her own devices much of the time. As the years went on, it also became clear that there was something different about her. She was kind and smart and funny, but that didn't tell the whole story. Her brothers and sisters were too, but they struggled in school or to scrape together a living, just as her parents did, while Hazel seemed to attract blessings. The people around her didn't resent her good fortune, though. They figured she'd had more than her share of bad fortune during the flood. Hazel never understood why she seemed lucky, but she knew enough to be grateful and not to let it go to her head. One day, while exploring the attic of their farmhouse, Hazel ran across the beautiful quilt in an old wooden chest. The cloth was soft in her hands, the edging impeccable, and towards the bottom was an image of a tree done in very fine stitches. She recognized the silhouette as a hazel tree, which meant this must be hers, but she'd never seen it before. She asked her siblings about the quilt, but none of them really knew anything about it. She asked her parents, but they were too caught up in their other worries to realize what she was talking about. Still, Hazel knew there was something special about this quilt because she felt so loved when she wrapped herself in its warmth. She didn't ask again where it came from, but she'd go up to the attic now and then to look at it. During one of her trips to the attic, she noticed something that at first seemed impossible. The tree was growing. She thought to herself, how can that be? But I know that branch wasn't there last time, and there were definitely fewer leaves over there. Once she got over the surprise of it, though, she realized that her heart felt even more full than before. It was like she always knew she was loved by some force outside her daily existence, and now each addition to the quilt extended her sense of connection to something magical, a connection that the people around her didn't share. Many years later, when she went to college, she took the quilt with her, of course. She kept it at the back of her closet, but she'd take it out every day. It helped her feel less homesick for her sisters and brothers and parents. The university wasn't far from the farm, just the next city over, but it was the first time in 20 years, the first time since the flood. One day, while Hazel was taking a break from her schoolwork and studying the quilt, she suddenly saw a shape in the stitches that she thought she recognized. She pulled out one of her books and flipped through the pages, and sure enough, she found what she was looking for. A map. The contours of the main repeating pattern exactly matched the roads in one of the villages far downriver. Could it be that the person who created the quilt lived there? She also noticed that the pattern had recently changed. The most recent stitches moved in a shape that matched the banks of the river, heading towards the city. The quilter must be coming for the big festival happening that weekend, commemorating the 20th anniversary of the flood. Hazel had another thought. Since the festival was only held every 10 years, she scanned the quilt to see if the same pattern appeared anywhere else. And sure enough, she could pick out the telltale curves of the riverbank, but only part of the way. Hazel needed to find out who had created the quilt. As it happened, Talia had tried to come to the previous festival, but along the way she'd fallen and broken her leg. She'd had to go back home, bitterly disappointed, which made her even more determined to make it there this time. It might be her last chance. Her eyesight was nearly gone, and her body was frail. But she wanted to offer thanks for the love she'd known for the year and a day that she'd been Hazel's mother. The love that still threaded through her life, along with the grief of separation. She worked feverishly to finish a special garment as an offering to bring to the altar by the great river. She'd need help to make it to the city, but plenty of people would be making the pilgrimage to the festival. Nothing would turn her back. In the meantime, Hazel was equally determined to find the person whose stitching had helped her so much over the years. When the festival day finally arrived, the girl meandered through the streets and around the plaza and over toward the river to try to find, well, she wasn't quite sure what. Then across a large park, she glimpsed an old woman she recognized, or at least she thought she recognized her. Hazel couldn't put her finger on where they might have met, but she scrambled through the crowd over to the woman who seemed to be heading to the river altar. The young woman tapped Talia on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, don't we know each other?" Talia replied, "I'm sorry, my eyesight is failing. I can't make out faces anymore. But I've never been to this city before. I'm not sure how we could have met." Hazel was sure she recognized the woman, though. "I'm originally from the next town over. Perhaps my family has sold you vegetables at the market?" Talia shook her head. "I grow food in my garden or trade with my neighbors in my village. I've never had to buy vegetables." Talia shook her head. As the old woman spoke, the girl knew for sure that they'd met somewhere. "Perhaps I'm friends with your granddaughter at the university, and I've seen a photo of you." Talia replied, "I don't have a granddaughter, so it can't be that either." Hazel was just about to give up, thinking she must be mistaken, when the old woman continued, "But I did have a daughter once, though she only lived with me for a year and a day. She came to me on the great flood 20 years ago, and ever since I've loved her beyond words and beyond time. My life is stitched with the color of her absence, but I came to this festival to give thanks for the love I've experienced because of her. Even though our time together was short by the calendar, I've loved her every day, wherever she is." As Talia spoke these words, she showed the young woman the cloth she'd stitched as an offering of gratitude. Hazel immediately saw that it was the same work as her quilt. She hadn't recognized the old woman by her face, but by the love she'd sent Hazel for the past 20 years. The love that had strengthened Hazel beyond all understanding, beyond words, beyond time. As Talia started again towards the river altar, the young woman called out to her, "I know the girl of whom you speak, and she's just as grateful for your love." A lump caught in Talia's throat. "Tell me," she asked, "is she happy?" The girl paused. "Yes, she is." The old woman smiled as tears sprang to her clouded eyes. "Then I've done my job. No mother could ask for anything more." She walked away, leaving the girl to wonder. The love we send out into the world is real, and it matters, whether or not we ever get to see its effects. Blessed be.
Sleep, my child, and peace attend you all through the night. I who love you shall be near you all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours are creeping, ill and veiled in slumber sleeping. My stealing, visions of the day revealing, breathes a pure and holy feeling all through the night.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
The love we send out into the world is real, and it matters, even if we never get to see its effects. Let's use our love to transform this beautiful world into one with even more compassion, more healing, more justice, and more connection. Go then with courage and with kindness, and be a blessing to the world. Amen.